Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming. And today we're going to begin chapter 6 of Canto 2. So we will discuss today chapter 6, which is Purusha Shukta confirmed. But first, we would like to review the creation as given in the last chapter. So in the last chapter, Brahma described to Narad Muni that the cause of all causes is Krishna. And from the expansion of Krishna is Mahavishnu. And this forearmed Mahavishnu lies on the causal ocean. And this ocean is like a cloud that has settled in the Brahma Jyoti. And this cloud, what is this cloud? This is the Mahat Tattva. And it is, we may call it like a formless form, which means is right now the ingredients are in its most subtle form. It's undifferentiated, subtle form. So everything is there. In other words, everything, all the elements are there, but it is undifferentiated and it's very, very subtle. So when the Mahavishnu glances upon this Mahatattva, the living entity, the living entities are actually injected into the womb of mature nature. And this, and when it's injected, there's another element called the time element, which is the Kala Shakti of the Lord, and which creates this false identification with matter, which is called the false ego. This false ego interacts with two things: the nature of the living entities, and basically nature means the desires and the wantings, and karma, which are the activities of the living entities. And in this way, mature nature begins to move towards the direction of a form. Because this mature nature is for souls that have turned their backs on Krishna. And therefore, Maya gives them the unhappiness of birth and death. So this undifferentiated Mahatattva, by the will of Krishna, is the Ichha Shakti of the Lord, which is time. It first differentiates into the three modes of mature nature. So nothing really happens without the wish of the Lord. That is very important. And so these three modes are the modes of passion, ignorance, and goodness. So from the mode of goodness comes the demigods, the controllers of the universe. So first, these are combined. And this is, and also the mind. So the demigods, which are the controllers of the universe, they come from the combination of the mode of goodness and false ego, and also the mind. And from the mode of passion, the five working senses, the five knowledge-gathering senses are coming, as well as the intelligence. They're formed so that the living entity can do his activities, can actually use his intelligence to fulfill his material desires, basically. Then, with the combination of false ego with the mode of ignorance, the gross material elements we heard last time begin their spiral of material creation. So what comes out really briefly? There's sound, and from sound comes ether, and then the sense which perceives sound, which is the ear. So it's going in a spiral of the most subtle to the gross. And in this way, there is touch, and from touch comes air, and the sense that perceives touch, which is the skin, is formed. And in this way, there's taste and then smell. So in this way, all the five elements are created one after another. And this way, the body is formed. But the actual forms cannot take place unless all these parts have been assembled. Now, they are still not assembled, by the way, right? What are they waiting for? They're waiting for the energy of Krishna. And at this point, Krishna, he actually breathes out all these universes, millions of universes, and they sit on the waters of the causal ocean for a long, long time. And Krishna comes, and Mahavishnu expands into Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and he enters into each universe called the Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and he's the second of the Purusha avatars. Now, he enters into each of these universes so that the living entities can live in the universes and satisfy their desires. At this point, he assumes the big Virata Rupa. So this is Garbhodakshay Vishnu. He assumes the Virat Rupa with thousands of eyes and mouths. Now, this Virat Rupa we've already heard a little bit, but it will be described again here. And it will also be described further in Canto 3. So in order to hear more, we will wait till Canto 3, which is given in Canto 3 in Chapter 6, where Maitreya Muni is speaking to Vidura, how after the creation of these elements that I just told you, the demigods actually pray to the Lord because they don't know how to move the creation forward. In other words, everything is there and the demigods are there, but things are not combining. So demigods don't have any power to keep the creation going. So they offer prayers. Because in the last prayer, they are telling Krishna that give us your kind direction so that we can serve you. So it shows that the demigods on their own have no ability. People may have knowledge about things, but they still, in order to have the ability to do things, they need also the potency to act. And that comes from Krishna. Even knowledge comes from Krishna. So in this way, Garbhodakshay Vishnu, he enters into all the 23 elements with time, which is Kali, and the gigantic form of the Virata Rup manifests. Now we have to understand, we already understood some, in an earlier chapter, but we have to understand that the Lord, what is the Lord in relationship with this Vishwarupa? How do we understand this form of the Virata Rupa? So the way we understand the relationship between the Lord and Virata Rupa is the same as a soul with a body. Now we know that the soul is composed of a different energy. The soul is really spiritual energy, and the body is material energy. So in one sense, we can say that the soul has no relationship with the body because we are spirit souls and we're not the body. But also one cannot say that there's no relationship between the body's growth, growth, which is resting on the presence of the soul. So in the same way, when Krishna enters the elements, it enlivens it. He enlivens it. Just as the soul, when it enters the body of the individual, the body starts to grow. Similarly, it is due to the presence of the soul, of the Lord, the gigantic form of the Lord, the Virata Rupa, came into existence, which is basically the body of the Lord. So the Virata Rupa of the Lord is not an eternal form. It is simply there to convince the impersonalists that the Lord has a form. It is a material manifestation of the Lord. Just like the deities, of course, it's a similar form for neophytes, but it is non-different from the Lord. In the same way that Virat Rupa is also, in a way, is non-different, but it's a material manifestation of the Lord. So the demigods, they had prayed, and Krishna's answer is this, entering into the elements, and the living entities then, and entering into the elements and as well as into the living entities, and in this way, he expands into the Virat form. In other words, the point that is made here is that there's nothing that can happen without the touch of the spirit. In other words, there has to be life. There has to be life. But as soon as the life leaves the body is dead. We know that, right? Is the body lovable after death? Otherwise, why is the body suitable for cremation? Because it is the touch of the soul that makes it grow, which makes the body dear, right? So when the Lord enters the elements, the Virata Rupa grows. Remember, Virata Rupa is where everything is contained. So within this universal form, everything in the universe exists, which means really that nothing is separate from the Lord. So within this universal form, everything existed. And in addition, we have, we have the instructional, you can say the instructional manual that comes with the creation, which is needed by those who need to operate it, like Brahma and the demigods. So in this way, the demigods obtain that ability to move the creation further, to push on the creation further. They really cannot create anything. They simply have to be part of that, part of that the part of of pushing it on, assembling, which is done by Brahma. But we'll see in the third canto what kind of functions the demigods do. So in our first slide, we're going to address the meaning of what Purusha Shukta means. What does Purusha Shukta confirmed mean? It's an interesting term, isn't it? It's a little bit, difficult. I mean, it kind of discourages one to do this chapter. It sounds so, incomprehensible, right? So what really Purushukta confirmed means is that it means to speak with sweet words that are within the Vedas. Now, this particular Shukta comes from the Rig Veda, and this prayer is sung by demigods when they pacify the Lord. So these prayers are description of the universal form and how the Lord expands into this form, who is the soul of the universal form. So the Krishna is the soul of this universal form. So in other words, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is the soul of this Virata form. So in our next slide, Brahma glorifies the Virata Rupa, the Virata Purusha. In this chapter, Brahma does that. In the third canto, the demigods pray. So here in text 1, I'll read you this verse. Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the Virat Rupa, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice. The controlling deity is the fire. The skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns. And his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. The 2 nostrils are the generating centers of our breathing and all other airs. His smelling power generates the Ashwini Kumara demigods and all kinds of medicinal herbs, and his breathing energies produce different kinds of fragrance. His eyes are the generating centers of all forms, and they glitter and illuminate. His eyeballs are the sun and the heavenly planets. His ears hear from all sides and are receptacles of the Vedas. And his sense of hearing is the generating center of the sky and all kinds of sound. His bodily surface is the breeding ground for the active principles of everyone and for all kinds of auspicious opportunities. His skin, like the moving air, is the generating center for all kinds of sense of touch and is a place for performing all kinds of sacrifices. So in this way, it goes on for many, many verses here, all the way to practically 16. And but in the verses 13 to 16, Brahma explains many, many different kinds of demigods and how they are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future, although Krishna is transcendental to all of them. So we have to understand that what this really means is that whatever we have, the facility that we have, for example, the nostrils are the centers of our breathing. His smelling allows us to smell. In this way, his eyes give us the ability to see. And it shows us that how everything in the world has a dependency upon the Lord. So we have to think, how potent is Krishna? Because his body is composed of Satchit Ananda. So in our next slide, the 4 stages of life necessary to advance in spiritual life is given. And Prabhupada has very nicely given this in verse 20 purport. And I'll read you the verse of 20. The spiritual world, which consists of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world, and it is specially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others who are attached to family life and who do not strictly follow celibacy vows must live within the 3 material worlds. This is a wonderful purport, and I thought it's very interesting to understand what Prabhupada is saying in this, the Varna Ashram, and how we can follow it in our family and with our children. So Prabhupada writes, the climax of the system of Varna Ashram Dharma or Sanatana Dharma is clearly expressed here in this particular verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. The highest benefit that one can be awarded to a human being is to train him to be detached from sex life, particularly because it is only due to sex indulgence that the conditioned life of material existence is continued after birth and birth after birth. Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit here because it's a long purport here. In order to award the highest benefit of human life, the Varna Ashram system trains the follower to adopt the vow of celibacy beginning from the order of Brahmachari. The Brahmachari life is for students who are educated to follow strictly the vow of celibacy. So Prabhupada is saying that if children are educated to follow this vow, then they can easily continue to the highest, they can easily continue into Grahastha life, and they can attain the highest perfection stage, which is the kingdom of the Lord. And then he talks about the householder life, which is attachment to family life. One can easily give up such a life of sex indulgence if he has been trained in the principles of the life of a brahmachari. In other words, how important it is to train our children in student life, because then only they can get into grahastha life with the goal in mind, with the ultimate goal in mind. Otherwise, it's practically impossible, because a householder life in the Vedic culture was expected to leave home at the end of 50 years, actually, and go to the forest. Of course, in Kali Yuga, one cannot do that. But the idea is that having trained, having one becomes ready if one is trained early in one's life, right? And then one may adopt the order of sannyas for men, of course, and women go to stay with their husbands. The whole idea is, of course, detachment from all types of, family life at the end of one's life. Any form of religious principles in which the followers are trained to pursue the vow of celibacy is good for human beings, because only those who are trained in that way can end the miserable life of material existence. Interestingly, Prabhupada writes something else here. The principles of nirvana, as recommended by Lord Buddha, are also meant for ending the miserable life of material existence. And this process, in the highest degree, is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam with clear conception of ideal perfection, although basically there's no difference between the process of Buddhists, Shankarites, and Vaishnavites for promotion to the highest stage of status of perfection, namely from freedom from birth and death, anxiety and fearfulness. Not one of these processes allows the follower to break the vow of celibacy. So the commonality is in the process of celibacy, which gives one freedom from birth and death. Otherwise, he says this is practically impossible. He says the householders and persons who have deliberately taken the vow of celibacy cannot enter, who deliberately broken the vow of celibacy cannot enter the kingdom of deathlessness. In other words, at the end of life, we have to make sure that we are detached. So the pious householders or the fallen yogis or the fallen transcendentalists can be promoted to the higher planets within the material world. In other words, they don't exit the material world. They can go to, if they've been good householders, basically following the Vedic principles, but yet not quite have completed the process of detachment, then they do go to the higher planets in the material world, but they will fail to go to the spiritual world of deathlessness, Prabhupada says. So here, after this, Brahma, who is born, remember how Mahavishnu is expanded into Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and Brahma is born from the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. He understands his first impetus, and that is sacrifice. So this leads us to our next slide. Brahma did the first primal sacrifice from the body of Krishna, and others followed. So Brahma says, when I was born, from the abdominal lotus flower, Lord Mahavishnu, the great person, I had no ingredients for sacrificial performances except the bodily limbs of the great personality of Godhead. And here Prabhupada in the purport, very nice purport where Prabhupada describes that what is really sacrifice and what Brahma and the process by which Brahma did sacrifice. In other words, first he talks about how Brahma appeared from the navel of Lord Vishnu on a lotus flower, the process which will be described elaborately in the third canto. So maybe we can skip that. However, just in brief, how the abdominal, Prabhupada writes how the abdominal lotus flower is part of the Lord's bodily limbs. So basically, Lord Brahma is born from the Lord directly. So he is part of the Lord's body. And how when he came, he couldn't see anything, and everything was darkness, and he felt perplexed. And Lord inspired him from within his heart, and he underwent austerity. And in this way, he acquired the ingredients for sacrificial performance. So there was nothing besides him and Mahavishnu at that time. And many ingredients were needed for that, and he obtained that from the bodily limbs of the Lord. And one of the things that was needed was animals. And then Prabhupada explains that how the animal sacrifice is never meant for killing the animal, but achieving the successful result of sacrifice. So the animal is destroyed, but the next moment he's given a life by through the chanting of those mantras purely by these brahmanas. And how when these brahmanas are not present, how animal sacrifice or killing of animals is forbidden. So in this way, Prabhupada explains very nicely. So Prabhupada explains how everything so this Brahma's primal act of sacrifice shows that everything that we have should be first offered to the Lord and to his energies, right? So everything belongs to him, and we must offer it to him. And how everything should be used in his service. So we'll move on to our next slide, in which Prabhupada explains the importance of sacrifice. So this is contained in verse 28 in the purport. The text reads, "Thus I created the ingredients and paraphernalia for offering sacrifice out of the parts of the body of the Supreme Lord, the enjoyer of sacrifice, and performed the sacrifice to satisfy the Lord." So purport, a very nice purport, Prabhupada writes that how Brahma, I'll read it, the Brahma, the original living being within this material world, taught us the way of sacrifice. The word sacrifice suggests dedication of one's interest for the satisfaction of a second person. And then Prabhupada goes on to explain how the nature of the soul is to sacrifice, and how everyone in this world is sacrificing his interest for others. Well, and this we can see how people sacrifice for their family, for society, for community, for country, or for the entire world, for the interest of entire human society. But Prabhupada explains how the perfection of such sacrifice is attained when they're performed for the sake of the Lord. Why? Why for the Lord? Because he's the owner, he's the proprietor of everything. He's the friend of all living entities, and he's the maintainer, as well as the supplier of everything that we have. And therefore, he should be the only one who should be satisfied in all sacrifices. And one nice example is that of Mother Teresa. And Prabhupada writes in many purports and gives her example, how she was so famous because she sacrificed for others. And of course, Prabhupada himself, his whole life was a life of sacrifice. He left India at a very old age to give this knowledge to the rest of the world and to India. So in this way, Mother Teresa became dear just because she sacrificed her life to help others. So this sacrifice is very much appreciated in this world. In other words, we see that how when people are selfish and they don't do anything for anybody, they're not appreciated, right? In other words, they're looked down upon. Even in the karmi world, right? People who sacrifice for others, they are praised. Right? So in this way, Prabhupada explains very nicely that if one satisfies the Lord completely and one surrenders, satisfying the Lord actually means to surrender completely, right? So when one surrenders to the Lord completely, he has no worries. And because Krishna is in control. And that's why we see the Brajbasis, they have no worries because they have so much faith in Krishna. They know Krishna will take care of me. That's why the cowherd boys are going into the mouths of these, mouths of Agasur, completely nonchalant, knowing that Krishna is their protector. And in contrast, Prabhupada talks about how, the politicians, how, they're elected just so that they can sacrifice for the benefit of the country, and how they do just the opposite. And the people become so cynical about them, about public leaders. But here, sacrifice is just the opposite, wherein one person sacrifices, and what to speak of sacrificing for the Supreme Person. Okay, now we move on to our next slide, in which Brahma explains the actual process of knowing Krishna. So from text 34, we are hearing the actual process of knowing him, which is so powerful, knowing him, who is so powerful, right? Who is very, very powerful. But yet it's hard, and because he's so powerful, we need to know about him, just so we can understand who is this personality in whose body everything is contained, who makes us so controlled by him. We are so dependent on him. But Krishna is covered by the curtain of Maya, right? So how to know him? So Prabhupada explains how, people are seeing Krishna in different ways. How the materialists see Krishna within matter. Impersonalists, they see this undifferentiated oneness. And whereas Buddhists, they see nothing. So what is the process of knowing him? What does it mean to catch the lotus feet of Krishna? And Prabhupada, of course, explains, and Brahma is going to explain in further verses, how sincere bhakti is the only way to understand Krishna. There is no other material qualification that will help us understand Krishna. Which means basically bhakti means that only when Krishna allows himself to know him, then only we can know him. In other words, Krishna's mercy has to be there. In the story of Damodar Leela, when Mother Yashoda is tying Krishna, to this wooden mortar because he's been very naughty, then this the belt that she first has to tie the rope around his waist, it becomes short by 2 inches, right? Which means 2 fingers short. It's 2 fingers short each time, and she brings in so much rope is given, but yet his waist the rope is always short. And so Mother Yashoda is trying very hard, but nothing is happening. And she's getting more and more frustrated and more determined to tie her naughty Krishna. Yet the emotion is very, very pure of chastising Krishna, and because she loves him so much and she wants him to behave. And then ultimately it's Krishna's mercy that allows Krishna to be tied, right? So Prabhupada writes how both have to be there. The endeavor has to be there, but without the mercy of Krishna, the endeavor is not going to work. So in this way, bhakti is that, is invoking the mercy of Krishna. And without that bhakti, we cannot really know who the Lord is. In other words, we really cannot understand anything about this creation. And that's why you may remember in the beginning how Shukadeva Goswami, even though he's such a great devotee, he feels himself incapable to describe the creation. And he prays to the Lord for that mercy to be able to speak these words. So no matter how much knowledge we may have, how much we may study Srimad Bhagavatam, but unless we have Krishna's mercy in that element, nothing can actually happen, can really work. So Brahma in the following verses is going to be explaining so beautifully his own position. So he'll move on to our next slide, in which Brahma explains that just being a Vedantist, Vedantist means knower of all the Vedas, and he is the one, right? All the Vedas were given to him. This is not enough without being trained in Bhaktivedanta, which means Vedanta, Bhakti, Vedanta and Bhakti both is called Vedanta Bhakti. Yeah, so I will read verse 35, where Brahma says, although I am known as a great Brahma, perfect in the disciplined succession of Vedic wisdom, and although I have undergone all austerities, and I am an expert in mystic powers and self-realization, and although I am recognized as such by the great forefathers of the living entities, who offer me respectful obeisances, still I cannot understand him, the Lord, the very source of my birth. So this is amazing, where Brahma is saying, I have everything. I have undergone austerities. He has all the mystic powers. He's recognized by everyone as the father of all fathers. But yet I cannot understand the Lord. He learned the Vedic wisdom directly from the Lord, from within the heart. So here Prabhupada writes how both Vedanta plus Bhakti is needed in order to know a certain amount, he writes, a certain amount of the absolute truth. In other words, nobody can actually know the Lord fully. So in this way, he gives the example of Srila Vyasadeva, who was not satisfied with simply composing the Vedanta Sutras. Remember that story in Canto 1? And then he was very despondent, and his spiritual master Narad Muni told him that really Vedanta is not enough, and how he should write Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the absolute medium by which to understand the absolute truth. This takes us to our next slide, in which Brahma expresses his inability to know him. Even though he's a scholar, he's a mystic, he's everything. He performs sacrifice, yet he's still not able to know him, from verses 36 to 39. So I'll read text 36. Therefore, it is best for me to surrender unto his feet, which alone can deliver one from the miseries of repeated birth and death. Such surrender is all auspicious and allows one to perceive all happiness. Even the sky cannot estimate the limits of his own expansion. So what can others do when the Lord himself is unable to estimate his own limits? So very nice purport, in which I'll read how Prabhupada explains the position of Lord Brahma. Just so we understand that these prayers, if they're coming from Brahma, this advice, this guidance which is coming from Brahma, we better take it, because he's the most authority. He's the greatest authority for us. He writes, Lord Brahma, the greatest of all living beings, the greatest sacrificer, the greatest observer of austere life, the greatest self-realized mystic, advises us, as the supreme spiritual master of all living beings, that one should simply surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord in order to achieve all success, even up to the limit of being liberated from the miseries of material life and being endowed with all auspicious spiritual existence. Lord Brahma is known as Pitamaha, or the father's father. A young man consults his experienced father about discharging his duties, so the father is naturally a good advisor. But Lord Brahma is the father of all fathers. He is the father of Manu, who is the father of mankind all over the universal planets. Therefore, the men of this insignificant planet should kindly accept the instruction of Brahmaji and would do well to surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord, rather than to try to estimate the length and breadth of the Lord's potencies. Text 37. Since neither Lord Shiva nor you nor I could ascertain the limits of spiritual happiness, how can other demigods know it? And because all of us are bewildered by the illusory external potency, any internal energy of the Supreme Lord, we can see only this manifested cosmos according to our individual ability. So here Brahma is describing his own limitations, even though he's the most intelligent. Let us offer our respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose incarnations and activities are chanted by us for glorification, although he can hardly be fully known as he is. So here again, Prabhupada mentions in this purport how one cannot try to understand the Lord by challenging him. Only a humble devotee can understand the Lord by his earnest devotional activities. And it really doesn't matter what kind of activities those are. But it begins with the process of hearing and chanting, the glorification of the Lord. So here Brahma is giving us a glimpse of how great Krishna is, right? And in this way we understand how small we are. Now all these points will be expanded in Canto 3 in terms of the creation. But we have to understand that Canto 1 and 2 really contains, in a nutshell, everything, the entire Bhagavatam. They're like the lotus feet of the Lord. So understanding it first here is very, very necessary in order to understand further in Canto 3, which is, again, described in different ways in 3 different chapters. So here, Brahma is going to explain some ways in which to understand the Lord. Now, in this chapter, in the remaining verses, he actually explains the remainder. He explains that how through the understanding the Lord through the process of creation. That's why we are dealing with only creation still, right? But in the 7th chapter, he's going to describe the Lord in terms of his Leela avatars. So this next chapter is all about his Leela avatars. So in other words, there's 2 ways to understand the Lord that Brahma is giving us. One is through the process of understanding the Purusha avatars, the 3 forms, the 3 avatars of the Lord, which deal directly with the creation of the world, and then understanding the Lord through his Leela pastimes, through his Leelas. So from these remainder verses, 39 to 46, we're going to hear, Brahma describing the way to know him through the process of creation. And remember, this was actually the question that Narad Muni had asked Lord Brahma, his father, that how does Krishna deal with the material world? And so here these questions are being answered. And in these verses, Brahma describes all the 3 incarnations, how it begins with Mahavishnu, the first incarnation. And then he goes on to describe some more verses on this description on this Mahavishnu. Okay, and then I'm just skipping a few verses here. And then in verse 42, he talks about how again more about Karna Dakshayi Vishnu, in which he talks about how he's the master of eternal time, space, cause and effects, mind and elements, the material ego, the modes of nature and the senses, the universal, and then he divides himself into the Garbhodakshayi Vishnu, who is the sum total of all living beings. So in other words, basically we understand how Krishna expands into Balaram, then Balaram expands into Shankarshan, and from Shankarshan we have these three Purusha avatars. Now the thing to think about really is, why is all this being done? Why is all this? Why did Krishna have to make all this work so complicated? And in verse 42, basically, Prabhupada answers this question in the purport. That the reason is that how this material creation is only a temporary exhibition of the material energy of this Lord. And it is really, this material creation is necessary to give a chance to the conditioned souls who are unwilling to associate with the Lord in his relationship in the spiritual world, in his transcendental service. And such unwilling conditioned souls are not allowed to enter into the spiritual existence, which is 3/4 of the entire creation, because they have material desires. So because they want to enjoy themselves. So to fulfill these material desires, so many things are created. And so many demigods, millions of demigods, are designated to help us fulfill our desires. So all this complex material creation is just so to give us a facility to enjoy, so that one day we can realize the futility of it all and turn towards Krishna. Not give our back towards Krishna, but turn towards Krishna. So in our next slide, we'll move on to our next slide. Brahma explains that no one is independent of the Lord. This is covered in verses 43 to 45. Very nice verses. And in this verse, which is a very long verse, Brahma describes all the different personalities who are, who are greater personalities, very powerful personalities. So Krishna is very powerful, but also Krishna, creates living entities who are very, very powerful in the material world. Right? First, of course, are the demigods, who are very powerful personalities. The Prajapatis, they're the most powerful. Then come the heavenly demigods, such as Indra and Chandra, they're the leaders. And then we have the great leaders of the earthly planets. In this material world, we can see there's many, many powerful personalities who are taking birth, but they are full of, sinful tendencies. In this way, there's many, many powerful personalities. And there's powerful animals and birds, but yet we have to understand, Prabhupada here, Brahma says that, in other words, everything who has possessed of power, opulence, mental and perceptual dexterity, strength, forgiveness, beauty, modesty, opulence, and breeding, whether in form or formless, may appear to be the specific truth. They may appear to be God. And that's why we see in the material world how people sometimes worship powerful living entities as God, right? But actually they're not so. They're only a fragment of the transcendental potency of the Lord. And then in this, purport, Prabhupada also explains, and again, smashes the Mayavadis who say that God is formless. And he challenges them that if I'm a person, then, and my father is a person, and his father is a person, then why will Krishna not be a person? Does he forget to become a person? And he also smashes their theory, which says that their theory is that as long as the people are jivas in this material world, in nations, then we are impersonal. We are personal, but we become personal as soon as we are liberated, and at that point we merge into Brahman. And Prabhupada spent a lot of time smashing this. That why? Because this philosophy is so much rampant in this world. That in other words, we are God. We're just simply doing our leelas, in this world of suffering. But again, like I mentioned last time in the class, that how God is not going to perform leelas of suffering. He hasn't. Why would he want to suffer in this material world? God is God, whether he's Anyway, even when he comes to the material world, his body is transcendental. So there's a big difference between the jiva and the Lord. In text 46, O Narada, now I shall state one after another the transcendental incarnations of the Lord known as Leela avatars. Hearing of their activities counteracts all foul matters accumulated in the ear. These pastimes are pleasing to hear and are to be relished. Therefore, they are in my heart. So Prabhupada explains how in the purport, there's so many trash literatures on the market. But one who has taken interest in the Srimad Bhagavatam loses all interest in such filthy literature. He calls them filthy. Sri Brahmaji is thus attempting to narrate the principal incarnations of the Lord so that they may be drunk by Narada as transcendental nectar. And that comes up in the 7th chapter. Okay, so thank you very much. And now we'll give it over to Rati Preshta Mataji for her presentation on how to understand this chapter through the activities in the guidebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji, for so wonderfully explaining these sweet words of the Vedas. You have made them more sweeter by your easy explanation and understandable, which is understandable for all of us. Thank you very much. Now I will proceed with the guidebook. Just share the screen. Yeah, so the chapter is Purusha Sutta confirmed. So again, the story summary begins with a very interactive and conversational manner. Narada Muni's eyes widened in excitement. He felt like a curious explorer unexpectedly finding hidden treasure. Until now, his father was the supreme, or so he thought. But his nagging sentiment that something or someone was higher was now confirmed. His father, Lord Brahma, had not only confirmed this, but was also about to describe how everything in this material world was created by this higher being who was actually the Lord himself. So this goes on and it describes so beautifully like various various senses and various experiences are also described here in this chapter summary, so that children can actually, it becomes so lively for children. They can relate. Like, for example, it says when it is talking about the smell, it talks about like the musk from the musk deer. Yes, like the lavender from lavender plant and jasmine from jasmine flower. Yes, yes, yes. So it becomes very interactive, very lively, and children can very easily relate to the summary is made in such a manner. There are poetic expressions also, wherein here in second page we can see acknowledging his son's appreciation for the supreme. Narad's father continued to describe various features of this supreme Lord, and this so beautiful poetic expression which children can love hearing to, and they can understand so complex verses through these beautiful poems. And it becomes very easy for them to imagine and understand, and they can relate it to their own lives. From his eyes come all the forms that one may see. His hearing brings the skies and the various melodies. Our sense of touch comes from his skin. His bodily hairs are trees on him. So like this, children can imagine, they can sing, and sing. Poetic poems are really very very helpful for children to understand these verses. So they can actually enact poems also. They can sing them again and again, and they can remember these verses also by singing these short poems like this. So it has made this is made in such a lively manner that children can really enjoy these story summaries. And then there are understanding the story questions, which again help us to assess how well children have understood the chapter. Then there are these higher order thinking questions, which uh, the parent or the teacher can always keep a note of these questions beforehand. When we are reading the translations with children, children can be helped to reflect deeper upon these higher order thinking questions, and they can go into the purpose of these and reflect upon them, debate, discuss. So this way they can live philosophy. Then there are very nice artistic activities, wherein again very beautifully it is explained that how Lord's skin is the generating center for all kind of sensations. So whether it is soft, whether it is spiky, whether it is smooth or rough, all the sensations that one feels are all coming from the Lord's skin. So that this wonderful activity wherein children can collect various materials which are and they can trace their hands and then paste those materials to show that here my daughters have taken coconut shell and some mud, soft mud, then mustard seeds, peel, vegetable peel, pineapple leaves, which are little spiky also. So they have tried to, depict like this how different senses are, different sensations are coming from Lord's skin only, different kinds of sensation of touch. And there is another activity which again reinforces the same concept, wherein now here the concept sense of smell is coming. So how different fragrances are also coming from Lord's breathing energy. So these are all some beautiful exercises and activities which can help children to actually understand this philosophy. To by doing these activities they can realize them, rather than just reading the verses and helping them to understand. By when they do these activities and then they relate it to the concept behind these activities, they can remember them forever, and it puts a deep impression on children's mind. So here she has made Lord Krishna's face as a fragment this thing. In the activity they had to paint any beautiful picture they can draw, and then they have to paint the entire picture normally by the poster colors, and some part of it they have to make mix the fevicol and some fragrance they have to mix, and then they have to paste it, and then when she scratches it even now and smells, so it smells very beautifully. So like this they can realize that how Lord's breathing energy is the source of all kind of fragrances. So this is one concept which goes deep by doing such exercises. And then there are some critical thinking activities like, now that they have reached second canto, they can reflect upon what they have understood from Srimad Bhagavatam. Do they relish hearing about Krishna? Is that in some way reducing their material desire? So these are some prompt questions which can be asked by children, and we can have children can very wonderfully. I was very surprised. My younger daughter, when I asked them that which incarnation of Krishna do you like most, I just asked them like this. So I never expected. She said Srimad Bhagavatam, the incarnation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Normally, children may say like Rama avatar or Parshurama or Narsingha avatar, or these Leela avatars. They may be able to relate to these avatars better. But now that they are reading Srimad Bhagavatam every day and they are doing these activities and enjoying them, so she spoke like this. I was also taken aback when she said that Srimad Bhagavatam is the incarnation of Lord, which I appreciate and like the most. So this is how children can actually go deep into Srimad Bhagavatam by these activities. And there is Lord's form debate, which again I became one part. Children can be divided into two teams, and either two teams or in pairs they can do this activity wherein they have to debate whether Lord has a form, meaning one team or one child can take an argument and present that yes, Lord has a form, and the other one has to present the counter argument that Lord is impersonal or doesn't have any form. So like this argument can be raised, and then the parent or teacher can help children to come to the conclusion. Then there is yagya, this activity. It requires children to do some small research and find out what are different kinds of yagyas that have been performed in history, in Vedic culture, how people used to perform yagyas, what was the importance of yagyas, what kind of ingredients were required, what kind of mantras were chanted, and finally, who was the beneficiary, for whose pleasure these yagyas were performed. And while we were discussing all these, my daughters also came to the point that in Kali Yuga, most important yagya is Sankirtan yagya, and they also themselves came to this conclusion that because the Brahmins are not so pure and because the materials and ingredients are not so pure in Kali Yuga, so we cannot really perform different kinds of yagyas that were performed in other ages. The best and practical yagya which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us is Sankirtan yagya. So for this age. So this is how they themselves also reach this kind of understanding. And then nature of material happiness, it requires children to make a graph of an activity wherein a graph of a period of time wherein they have had an experience of material happiness by getting something material, like for example a new toy they got, or some an extra vacation, or something that they desire and they got it, something material, some gift or some appreciation which they felt very happy or glad about. And then how that kind of happiness gradually reduced over time, and so they have to draw a graph of it. Since my daughters are a little younger, they have not learned how to make graph. So we discuss this activity, we discussed it in form of question, and then they came out with I encourage them to find the difference between the material happiness and spiritual happiness. So she wrote that how material happiness is actually, it ends very soon and it gradually decreases, and whereas spiritual and happiness is never ending. Material happiness bonds us to material world, whereas this spiritual happiness takes us back to Godhead. And material happiness is flickering in nature, whereas spiritual happiness is ever increasing. So this is also how activities can be molded according to the age and capacity of children. Then there are very nice theater activities wherein this is a verse mime from first verse to verse number 11. There are various, how it is explained that how different parts of universal Virat Rupa, represent different things in this material world. So how children can actually, either some soft music can be played and they can prepare a mime, or a parent or the teacher can read the verses and then they can enact. Like for example, this is a small clipping from So this is how, it was a long, this thing from verse 1 to 11. I've just shown a small clipping for an idea. And then there are many writing activities like punctuation practice, wherein children can put in apostrophes, commas, full stops, capitals. Those all linguistic skills can be developed through the help of this chapter story. And then there are these fill in the blanks, wherein again children have to fill in the blanks with the story that they have read. This is very interesting sequencing activity which also helps children to again have a sequence of the story in their mind and to understand how story unfolds, especially in chapters like this wherein various parts are described. The relationship is described with reference to Virata Purusha. So it helps children to have a particular sequence in their mind. And then there is this very nice report writing activity wherein children have to write a news report about the experience of Narada Muni discovering that Lord Krishna is actually the supreme creator, not his father, Lord Brahma. So the entire process of news writing, meaning writing news articles, is explained here. How children have to first identify a headline, a catchy headline, some captions, some quotations from the actual incident. So this is how she has first identified various parts and main events in the story. Headline of the story, she has made it Narada could not believe. And then some quotation which she has quoted the verse 4 from the chapter 5th, meaning the last chapter. And then she has written this story. Narada saw his father performing various austerities, and then he had a doubt this father's supremacy. Narada inquired, my dear father, what is the source of your knowledge? Under whose protection you are standing and under whom you are working? What is your real position? Do you alone create all the living entities with material elements with your personal energy? Brahmaji answered by referring to Virata Rupa. He explained how Krishna is creator and source of everything, including himself. So this is small news report that she has written. And then there are again fill in the blanks and true or false, wherein which also have set of inferring questions, wherein children have to kind of justify and whether they agree or disagree. So why do they agree or disagree with the given statement? And then these are jumbled words which have to be unjumbled and put in properly. Then there are these keywords with definitions. And lastly, children have to write a story summary with some specific qualities in which Krishna has been glorified in these verses. So this is how they have to, they can also summarize the story in their own words, which will again help them to, to relate to the entire story and explain it in their own words to adults by writing. So this is all. There is also these younger kids word search and older kids word search. Children can, again, according to the age, children can use whatever age group children belong to. Then there are answers to all the questions. The understanding the story, punctuation practice, missing words, sequencing, all the answers are provided in a very systematic manner so that children can refer to these also. That's it. So I thank you all very much. Now we open the session for questions, and participants can raise their hands for questions so that we can enlighten. Any questions anybody has? You can raise your hands, please. Hemavati Mataji is asking, Mataji, how much time do you spend on these activities each day? And how long does a chapter takes for them? Mataji, every time, meaning every week, we do this. Every day we read around 2 hours I spend. Meaning not at a stretch, but whenever they get time in between, whenever they feel like they themselves come and demand that we should study Srimad Bhagavatam and we should do activities. Actually, I try to cover, meaning we read translations 2 or maximum 3 days, and then rest 3-4 days we do activities. So 2 hours I spend every day, almost 2 hours. Sometimes it's 1.5 hours like this. But they really enjoy and they want more of a time. I am not able to give more time, and we also have to manage with their school studies. So I somehow make a balance so that they do their school task also, and these activities also simultaneously go on. Yes, Archana Mataji has a question. Mataji, you can unmute yourself.
Hi Krishna Mataji, thank you so much for the wonderful explanation. So Mataji, I just wanted to check my understanding here. So in the last chapter and this chapter, like when Lord Brahma explains like the many different forms and everything, it's almost like he's using some similes and metaphors, like to explain this Virat Purusha in a way that can be digested by us, so that we can train our minds and hearts to focus on the Supreme Lord and view everything as a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Like we cannot take it literally, right? Just for example, when you say the mountains are like the arms are like so and so. So these are like the Brahma. Lord Brahma is just giving us this to make it easy for us to understand. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, he's basically giving a vision, the idea that everything is contained within the body of the Lord, and how we should see everything in connection with the Lord. But he's in the last chapter was called the cause of all causes. Basically, Krishna is the cause behind all the causes. So whatever we see in the world, the effect or the cause, all comes from Krishna, and we are simply rediscovering these things. And when we offer it to the Lord, then Krishna, it's like offering, when people go to the Ganga and they take a little water and they offer it back to Ganga. Now, Ganga is not benefited by that little water that we offer to her. It already belongs to her. So, but we are benefited. So in this way, when we learn to see this, this was, like I said last time, it was like a blueprint for people who are very powerful in the creation, like the demigods and Brahma, to get their process going. But for people like us, it is very good because we understand the omnipotency of the Lord, how powerful the Lord is and how everything is contained within him. Because the way the process of creation is described is very, very logical, very, very interesting. Like I mentioned, that Krishna basically is, initially Krishna is expanding into Mahavishnu, and until the Mahavishnu glands. And this is the material sky. First of all, it begins from there. The material sky is just a little cloud in the entire Brahma Jyoti. So the whole span, the sky is Brahma Jyoti, and there's a little cloud. In other words, 3/4 of the creation is the spiritual world, and just this little cloud in which Mahavishnu, sits on lays down on the causal ocean is the material sky. And even in that little sphere, how powerful and how big Krishna is. So we get that sense. So it's meant to give us an understanding of the power. So in other words, it is an imaginary form of the Lord. But for the understanding of the neophyte, his process of devotional service begins, by which he connects that imaginary form to to his understanding of the world, basically.
Thank you, Mother. Another question I have was like in many places in the Srimad Bhagavatam, like even in Lord Bhishmadev's prayers, Prabhupada always writes this term as like thinking, willing, and feeling. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
You mean the mind, the way that the mind functions?
Yeah. So when, for example, even in this chapter, like on verse 25, he mentions how the body has limited field of activities, and then like everybody is the owner of, we see something, like everybody's perception is very different, and like and like in Bhishmadev's prayers, like he says like Lord Bhishmadev says that when he's about to leave his body, he said, okay, I'm going to invest my thinking, willing and feeling on the Supreme Lord now. Like basically, like the entire being is focused on that particular point. So that was my understanding. But like, if you have any thoughts on this, I thought I'd check with you.
So the whole process of purification is purifying the mind. And the mind has these three functions: thinking, willing, and feeling. It has these three functions. So basically, when a devotee prays, when Bhishmadev is praying, so that all his thinking and willing and is devoted on the form of the Lord, it means that his desires and the Lord's desires become one. So this is the Achintya Bheda Bheda philosophy, where we are simultaneously one and different from the Lord. So merging our thinking and feeling and willing into the Lord means that we have amalgamated our desires with the Lord. So that's the oneness. And the difference is that we have still the individual soul, like I was mentioning in the class, is very small part of the Lord, and it still has the tendency to fall down. It has a tendency at any point. It has a tendency. Now, once he goes to the spiritual world, after learning his lessons, chances he doesn't fall down. But at some point, we did fall down. So in other words, So this process, whether it's mystic yoga process or whether it's bhakti yoga, the whole process. That's what Prabhupada says. How ultimately the process for everyone is this. For Buddhism and all bona fide religions is the same. The idea is to get out of this material world, to free oneself from this material world, from this process of birth and death, right? So the idea of all process is to actually purify the mind, to control the mind, And so this is the meaning of, merging our thinking, feeling, and willing. And this is the function of the mind. And that's why mind is, when false ego combined with a mode of goodness, mind was created. The mind was this combination of goodness with the false ego, material mode, right? Because it's higher, in one sense, the intelligence is born from mode of passion. Because then we take those desires, whatever the mind has, and we execute it through our intelligence. So the mind is full of material desires, and naturally the intelligence is also very passionate, because he's now engaged in this duty of executing those things. Okay, so how important it is to control the mind. So many verses in the Bhagavatam is dedicated to that. The process of Avanti the Brahman, he when he realizes in the 11th canto how that he through his suffering, he's understanding that how the process is to connect with the Lord by controlling the mind, basically. So all yogis' endeavor is to control the mind. But for bhakti yogis, this process becomes simplified. We simply think of the Lord, and engage in his devotional service.
Thank you, Mataji. Yeah.
Mataji, Ankur Prabhu's daughter wants to convey her thanks to you for writing these.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to clarify that I did not write. I mean, just you, Uncle Prabhu, you can explain that to your daughter, because Prabhupada wrote this Bhagavatam, and what we are trying to do, and there's a whole team of people behind this we are trying to create resources to make that more understandable for our children. Srimad Bhagavatam more understandable to the children. But this instruction of Prabhupada to give Srimad Bhagavatam to his children was being executed by many, many great devotees in the movement, even in the Gurukulas, because it was very dear to Prabhupada, the Srimad Bhagavatam taught to the children. Okay, so that's important to understand, that how Prabhupada gave us this great jewel, and how and he encouraged us to present this jewel in different ways, which becomes in different ways, so that it becomes more digestible to our children. So so by Prabhupada's mercy, we are trying to do this humble task of doing that. But again, the process begins from understanding directly from Srila Prabhupada's books, and we can do it in different ways for us younger children. We can explain it, in different ways to make it more understandable. Okay. Thank you.
Definitely, Mataji. Thank you so much. I will convey your message to her. Actually, during the day, we were making the list of all the books. So we took up Bhagavatam, and Bhagavatam compiled by you. Then we had one bigger Bhagavatam, which our Babaji used to read in Hindi. So we were just writing. So then she realized, okay, acha, ye bhi Bhagavatam hai, ye bhi Bhagavatam hai. What is the difference? Yes. So then I was explaining to her, so she could realize.
Yes, Prabhu. It's so nice. You're encouraging her in every way. That is true.
Kind of a writing exercise. We were just making a list, so that was good for her.
Yeah.
Mataji, I have one or two specific questions also.
Okay.
One is, as you mentioned in the slides, that Srila Vyasadeva wanted to write not Bhagavatam, it was Vedanta Sutra. And so after he met, Narada Muni, his spiritual master, so he guided him to write Srimad Bhagavatam. So this question also earlier came that he had already written Puran, so he re-edited. So could you please throw a little light on this? Like what had he written, then what changes did he make, in case some details are available?
Yeah, so he wrote everything that is found in the Vedas, the Vedanta Sutras, and then he also wrote the Puranas, and from which we have the Mahabharata, and in which the epic Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, in which the jewel Bhagavad Gita is also contained. But even then, he found he found himself lacking, because because it was important to understand devotional service from it was not enough. Basically, what it was, that even though those Puranas were there, Mahabharata was there, and from it the Bhagavad Gita was there, it was not sufficiently. It was not sufficient to really give the message of Srimad of the importance of devotional service. the sweetness of devotional service, how even Krishna gets conquered through this process of devotional service. It was not sufficient. And that is why he was feeling despondent. Not that Bhagavad Gita is not adequate for us to go back to Godhead. It's a transcendental literature and is adequate. But to understand more in the light of Krishna and his pure devotees and how they serve him, especially in Vraja, which is depicted in the 10th canto, it was still lacking, and so that is why he wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So Mataji, that instance comes now that when he had already written it, so after the inspiration of Narad Muni, did he write or he just re-edited? And if it was re-edited, like this question comes to mind, that what portion had been written, if there are some details available, that what portion was written and what portion was re-edited.
You mean what portion was written earlier and what was written later or something?
Yeah. Something like that, if some details are available like that.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the class, some details, but really there's not, in the purports, Prabhupada does not give great details about how the whole process happened. It's not in the purport of, in his purports from that earlier chapters, it's not really given of how, Vyasadeva, how he came about writing the Srimad Bhagavatam, with the process, what came earlier and what came later, But all these things, the details are really not necessary, because the whole process is cyclical. You know how Vedic time is cyclical. So there's things that are happening which may become earlier or later, but if we get too much into that, we forget the essence, of what Krishna is trying to tell us. It's in this way what Prabhupada is trying to tell us. Okay.
Right. Sure. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Mataji, Hemavati Mataji is asking if there is any other Mataji who is doing such sessions in Pune, because she is trying to do this book with her daughter, but she would always feel better if there is some other can pull in, somebody else can. So she
Pull
just
in.
wanted.
I don't understand the question. Pull in what?
Mataji, in Pune, is there some Mataji who is doing these sessions?
Oh yeah, Pune is there are many devotees who are. Oh, there's Geeta Upasana Mataji who's on the call. She does classes in Pune, and she has a whole team of teachers also who are doing these classes online. Right now over Zoom in her area. If that's your question, definitely you can connect with her. And Geeta Upasana Mataji, you can give your phone number maybe in the chat box, so this devotee can connect with you, please. Hare Krishna. Maybe she's not on the call now. I'm not sure.
Yes, Geeta Mataji.
Maybe she stepped out or something.
Yeah. So Hemavati Mataji, I will tell Geeta Mataji to.
No, maybe you can send. You can put in the chat box, Rati Krishna Mataji.
Do it right.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. You can put her phone number in the chat box so she can connect with her. She's doing actually many classes, so it would be nice for her to connect with her. Yeah.
Any other question anybody has?
Okay. So we're almost time here, so we can end here. Thank you all for joining in, and next time we'll cover chapter 7. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Mataji, I'll just share the number.
No, there's 2 participants who raised hand. They have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Kalindini Sundari Mataji. Sorry, Mataji, I just did.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Kalindini Sundari Mataji, you can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Mother, please accept my humble obeisances.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a question. What is the meaning of dhira? Could you explain me?
Dhira?
Yes.
Means somebody who's sober. So dhira means sober. So anybody a person is sober if he knows the purpose of life, what his duty is, So such a person is a dhira. A person who doesn't understand the purpose of life is not a dhira, So devotee is, in that sense, is always a dhira because he understands. He's grave. He understands that there's a purpose of life, and one should not just, in a futile way, spend one's time, but rather use his energies and his time to serve Krishna.
And Dhritarashtra took become a dhira at the end of his life. So I want to explain my case. What does that mean? He took the he made.
In other words, he understood the difference between matter and spirit. Okay, he understood the difference. He came to that platform, understanding, and that he's not this body, but there's a stage beyond that, beyond the dhira stage, right? It mentions in that purport over there that beyond that stage is devotion, bhakti. But one has to become a dhira, in order to attain the stage of bhakti. But Dhritarashtra was only on that platform of that understanding, the jnana platform. He was on the stage of jnana, not so much on the stage of bhakti.
So what he meditate, Mata, when he leaving body?
Well, due to the mercy of Vidura, he did, he had directly connection with Krishna, right? He actually interacted with Krishna. So towards the end, he was able to understand who Krishna was. But because he was so mired up in worldly things, especially, doing so much harm to the Pandavas, so his destination was not the same as Bhishma Dev, He was not in the same stage because he had, done a lot of sinful things, and therefore his destination is, being liberated from this material world. But that's the external way to see it. But the internal way is that actually Dhritarashtra, Prabhupada writes, it was actually a very great devotee of the Lord, and he was doing his part so that this Leela could happen. So in reality, he was one of the Lord's, very confidential devotee. So we have to see it from both the internal perspective and the external perspectives. For the purpose of understanding on our level, we understand that Dhritarashtra achieved freedom, from this material world, but not the ultimate freedom of entering Goloka Vrindavan. Even Vaikuntha, But otherwise, if he hadn't gotten the mercy of Vidura, he may not even have made to that. That's why he was very fortunate. So there's so many lessons to learn from that. How through the mercy of a pure devotee like Vidura, one can be saved. Okay.
And Mata, another question, like my case thinking, like Dhritarashtra getting association of pure devotee like Pandavas, then why you have to give up the home?
Yeah, because again, the process of Vedic culture was following this Varna ashram system. So important. I mean, today we read about that, right? How this Varna ashram, even though we cannot follow it perfectly like in the Vedic culture, but yet the principles, the essence is there. The children should be trained, as students, to be celibate, because that's where the contamination begins. When children are allowed to mix and and lose this purity, then in that way the contamination begins. So this Vedic culture was very, very prominent. So in the same way, when towards the end, the Pandavas, in order to teach the world, they left home. Because everybody has to understand that no matter how much, even Kapila Muni, Karda Muni left home, even though he had Kapila as a son in the house. When you're directly dealing with Krishna in the house, what is the need of leaving home? Again, these great souls are setting the example that even if the Lord comes into your home, still one must leave home and become detached. So of course, in Kali Yuga, this is very difficult. So we try to at least, stay away from, the family responsibilities. We stay away and try to increase our devotional service to the Lord. At least we have to come to that platform. But ultimately, there is no process in Vedic culture of entering the spiritual world without detachment and engagement. So that's the negative perspective, not negative, but the perspective where it's jnana, but at the same time, there's a positive perspective of actual practical engagement in Krishna consciousness, Okay. So that's why the Pandavas are giving the example of leaving the world, of leaving their house and their palace.
Okay. Thank you, Mata.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
That
all.
is it.
Yes.
That is it.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Thank you all. Hare Krishna, everyone. We'll see you next week.